hi guys, we're the Improving Media Group, and I'm Makai, Rolton, Duretti, and Rivka, and our Vietnamese members, not exactly 100% sure how to pronounce their names, but Nguyen, and Han is what would be my best guess for them. So as a group, we just focus on how we'd be improving media throughout the U.S. and the U.S. and Vietnam.
So some background info, so the issues that we talked about a lot, and especially our first video conference with them, so pretty much the big three ones that we had. So false news and advertisements, so a lot of news that come up on social media websites that are not actually real from different news outlets that are not like trustworthy, kind of talking about that problem is here in the US, and does that also happen in Vietnam? And they responded with yes. So what makes news newsworthy? So the news that does get released and is very popular, why is it like that? You know, what attracts the people to wanting to see that type of news? And the lack of good or positive news trending. So kind of right now, there's a lot of disappointing and not good news that circulates in the world, especially with our political things that are happening. So we talked about how we would like for better news to be trending throughout the US and Vietnam.
So our research articles, we have three main ones. One was talking about how social media changes the world. Another talked about how rebuilding journalism, and our last article discusses the fact that we use social media platforms as
So what we learned generally was just we just like weighed the pros and cons of using the internet. So like we talked about earlier in this class, how we formed like the BS detector of just like double, triple checking your facts and just seeing the credibility throughout websites. So say, I guess a more reliable one that we would say is like CNN, but not everything that they write is going to be 100%. So just like looking around to, you're keeping your eyes open to looking around to make sure everything's factual. And then we also like identified that media is changing, like I guess the business world of how you can now like interact with somebody from Vietnam or China through just a webcam on your computer, and how that could be a strong influence on your business practices. And then so for our similarities and differences from the Vietnam team, their is more controlled by their media is more controlled by the government, where ours is a little bit more free at the moment, at least. So they just wanted they said they wanted a little bit more freedom, but we also talked about how we needed to channel our media into so that there's not so much fake news or like non-factual things out there.
Okay, so for our global policy solutions, we actually came up with a few with our side of the team and the Vietnamese group. So we basically just said, we agreed upon creating some sort of like, I don't know, governmental laws. So it's not really controlling, but in a sense it's limiting the amount of fake news that's being presented to people. And also we said that we kind of, on our side, proposed this idea of freedom versus control, because, well, regarding the internet, we kind of talked about how we can assess the internet or use the media as something that's free versus controlling it, because I think that our culture or how the state we live in within the media was kind of different, because in Vietnam, as you know, a lot of things are censored, and for us, it's kind of like freedom of expression. There's a lot of things that you can do and see and just on a daily basis in the media. So we kind of proposed that idea to them to get them to think in a sense. So yeah, that's the solution we came up with. And
Okay, so we have a couple interesting facts for you. U.S. spending on social media will reach up to $13.15 billion in the year 2017. 49% of people share online content with family, friends, and coworkers at least once a week. So a group reflection, for me, I wanted to work on communication, and based on my research, I learned that communicating slowly and clearly helps. And by working with the students through the internet, we saw that we needed to speak slowly and clearly.
And as for me, something that I wanted to work on starting in this quarter, or this course actually, was to be a challenger in the group. And at first I wasn't really sure how to approach that because I've never really done that. But I actually found it through the virtual conference. It was a little easier for me to do that because you have the people from a different country who have a completely different perspective from you. So it was kind of like they were teaching me how to be a challenger in a sense, and I got to bring kind of what I learned from them and onto our group. And with that, we were able to establish group norms, which we've done in the beginning of the course.
Something I wanted to work on in a group environment was definitely managing my time more effectively, whether that's during the video conference and sticking to the point, or in preparing for that, and just making sure staying on topic for the most part.
And lastly for me, I just wanted to be more open-minded and accepting to other people's ideas, so everybody felt included, or there wasn't someone wasn't feeling left out or unspoken. And I guess for challenges that we face throughout our presentation group video conferences, definitely number one would be scheduling. For example, for our second video conference, a couple of our members, one had a family member admitted to the hospital, so they couldn't make it, and they came up with a lesson, or they had a school lesson so we had to reschedule that for early next week. But especially with the big time difference, there was hardship in scheduling.
So the benefits and how it applies to the real world. One of them was working with students abroad through virtual communication can help you become a better leader. I think in that it's just a completely different experience working through language barrier and working through how they might think differently than us. It can really help you in the real world and in life. And also learning about each other's cultures while forming lasting impressions.
And for how it applies to the real world, we basically said you get to develop leadership skills which you'll need in the real world, meaning knowing what roles to play, how to play them, and when to play them. And another thing we talked about was cross-cultural communication, and I think that was one of the biggest things that we had to really work on within the conference. And I think, you can apply that to the real world because you'll interact with people from different backgrounds all the time or in your future careers. So this lesson kind of helped with that, and also building bridges, so understanding other people's perspective and just getting an idea of how other people see a certain issue or solution. Oh, and we have a short video we want to share.
Ciao, come on, come here.